So yes, that was The Dark Tower. Hello everyone, this is B. Harper from supermarcy.com and welcome to my final review of Stephen King's The Dark Tower series. And what an adventure this has been. Now, I'm not going to devolve into my own personal history with The Dark Tower because I've already done that. So what I'm going to do in this very brief video is I'm going to give a general rundown of the book, The Dark Tower, which is the final of the series, as well as my own sort of personal feelings towards the entire adventure in general. So, book-wise, this one has certainly split readers in terms of how it ends. Don't worry, I'm not going to say a single solitary thing about it. You should know me better than that. But let me tell you something. When you reach the ending of a massive quest that has demanded the time, patience and fortitude of not only its readers but also its characters in the text, you've got to make sure that you end on a satisfying note. And considering what Roland and his quartet have all been throughout this entire series of 7 books, to me it is satisfying, but it is not without its flaws, and I'll get into that. So first and foremost, this is the concluding chapter, okay? This is when Roland faces down with Mordred, the Crimson King, and Randall Flagg, aka Walter O'Dim. And let me tell you, King has made no illusions otherwise that the Dark Tower is not influenced by Arthurian legend, because when I read of Roland and Mordred going at it, I thought about King Arthur and Mordred going at it on the battlefield. Like, it had King's typical flavour and it had the context of the story, but the references to Arthurian legend are not to be ignored here, and they're not supposed to. And may I say, the Crimson King could very well be a far superior and more violent villain than, say, Walter O'Dim is. Now, Randall Flagg / Walter O'Dim has made more than a couple of appearances in King's books, okay? He seems to be King's evil lucky charm. But the Crimson King is like the big daddy. He is what it all comes back down to. Walter O'Dim is working in his stead, okay? Walter O'Dim is peanuts compared to the Crimson King, and the Crimson King makes for a very suitable menace. He does not go out like a chump, and that's another thing I've got to praise the story on, is that most, if not all, the characters get a sense of validation and verification when they have reached their goal. And may I say, Father Callahan, Father Callahan's amazing, and once again I'm just so glad that Stephen King took it on himself to reboot and improve this character that, while he was definitely substantial in Salem's Lot, he ends up very anticlimactic, and I'm assuming that's how King intended it to be. So I'm very glad Father Callahan got what he deserved in this book. And that goes for quite a few of the other characters, like Eddie Dean, and Susanna, and of course Randall. Well, not Randall, Roland, Jesus. Considering these folks have been made out to be like massive figures in the text, it is so wonderful to see moments that we see them shine individually. King is great at doing that. Now, in terms of what has divided this book between readers, it is the ending. I mean, it's a couple of other things too, like a couple of people that I know aren't exactly fans of how the book is written in general, but they still praise it for being imaginative, and, you know, it is more or less what they were sort of expecting. But the ending is extremely polarizing, and I completely understand. What I was saying before about characters getting their due, and, you know, when you reach the conclusion of a massive tale that just spawns over 7 novels, you've got to make sure that your audience walks away with, you know, full bellies. Now, of course, real life being what it is, what we want isn't necessarily what we get. And The Dark Tower ends on that sort of note. I love the ending. To me, it makes perfect sense that King would go ahead and pull that on his readers. And of course, the characters that are involved. Now, as I said, I understand why some people don't like that, because it seems somewhat abrupt, it seems sudden, and a couple of people may not actually get it. And I don't hold it against them, by the way. That's something that a reader needs to sort of figure out for themselves. They need to perhaps, read back over what's happened, or read a synopsis, or, even an academic paper, and sort of, piece together what's happened, and then they'll probably realise it. Now, how they would feel afterwards is completely up to them, but you get what I mean. But, yeah, The Dark Tower is the penultimate episode. And to see the three main villains of the Crimson King, Walter O'Dim and Mordred, it's so great to finally see them at full bore, alright? Up until, the Song of Susanna, and around that point, we didn't really get much of an indication about how big a threat these guys were. And finally, in The Dark Tower, we see that epic collision between the forces of good and evil over this tower that engineers and orchestrates all manner of life in every single dimension, in every single plane of existence. The Dark Tower is what controls that. And were it to fall into the wrong hands, and were it to be manipulated in such a way that it is not currently right now, it would be catastrophic, and you get a real sense of the stakes involved. So ultimately, The Dark Tower for me ranks as, say, a 4 out of 5. Now, I'm tempted to give it a 3.5 out of 5 because there are a couple of sequences that drag. Once again, I'm not going to say a thing about it, but just when you're telling a story, you've got to make sure you keep your audience on board with you, and sometimes it's extremely risky, like when you take what is admittedly a smaller plot strain and sort of like expand it, it is very, very risky of an author to do. Now, look no further than the Hobbit trilogy. Did it need to be a trilogy? Honestly, did a film adaptation of a children's book, which is not as long as the Lord of the Rings trilogy, need to be made into 3 movies? I don't think so. It's kind of like that. And yeah, but what saves it for me is finally we get to see the clash, the titans. We get to see a sense of the enormity of the situation, and everybody involved has a part to play. And for the most part, they play their roles well. Alright, so that was my very haphazard and very vague book review of The Dark Tower. And once again, that's my bed. Once again, I am loath to get away any sort of crucial details, because to me, that would ruin the experience to you out there who have not read this book and want to read it. So I don't want to be one of those people who ruins something potentially wonderful for you. I want you to, seek it out for yourself and experience it firsthand. I'm thinking about you. You all matter so much to me. Alright. Now, in terms of The Dark Tower in general, just the entire series, it has been an odyssey for me. Once again, I am so upset at my teenage self for not catching on to its brilliance as quickly as I did. Now, granted, I'm not the brightest crayon in the box, but it takes me some time to warm up to something, especially when it comes to fantasy. But, if you may remember from my review of Eyes of the Dragon, King is really, really good at writing his own sort of fantasy. He is mainly known for horror, psychological horror, or whatever you want to call it, but when he branches out into something that, when he goes on that road that is a little less travelled in terms of what products he sells, he can be really, really good. And The Dark Tower as a whole is no exception to that. It takes a special mind and a certain drive and passion to write about something so intricate and so opulent that you really have to admire it. Once again, if you say Stephen King has no talent, you are deluding yourself so much, my friend. But for all of its flaws along the journey, I was enamored with it come the end game, and it has stirred within me a creative spark. When I put down the final book, I started to think of myself in terms of the novice artist I am. Now, when I say novice, I am not a professional, alright? I don't have any credentials, I don't have anything to my name. So for me to say Oh yes, I am so knowledgeable about all things Dark Tower and artistry and that's a plain lie. But still, I cannot deny the impact it has left on me. And for me to have denied, how I feel about these books and how it has stirred something in me, I would be lying to myself. And truth be told, I don't like lying to myself. So, yeah, the Dark Tower has been an experience for me, and it has truly opened my eyes to not only how great fantasy and imagination can be, but it has reignited a flame within myself. I'm upfront, I'm not the most creative spirit, but when I sit down and put my mind to something, that's when I tend to start to feel really confident in what I do, in terms of a writer, in terms of an artist, in terms of anybody who uses their imagination and decides to commit it to a certain sort of media. So for a series like A Dark Tower, despite all its mishaps and its trip-ups and everything, it has been a positive influence on me, and I am so thankful that I finally got myself together and I read this series after all this time of sort of putting it aside and not being sure. I just took the plunge into this world, into this cavalcade of imaginative beauty, this creative vomit, this beautiful creative vomit that Stephen King has spurted out and put on the page, and I can't believe I just compared Stephen's writing to vomit, but but you get my meaning. The Dark Tower has been a wonderful experience for me, and I'm so glad that I got to join those who had read the books in the past, that I have now managed to see what you all saw. And I'm so glad that those of you who said, you should read The Dark Tower, you should read The Dark Tower, who were in my ear about it, I'm so glad that I finally decided to put aside my pride and listen to you. So I thank you so much for opening my eyes. And of course, Stephen King, I doubt you will even see this video, but thank you so much for showing me how wonderful and imaginative fantasy can be without sort of falling back on J.R.R. Tolkien's universe. Fantasy is not for everyone. Actually, there are certain types of fantasy that aren't for everybody, and I'm one of those people who don't really go into a library and pick up the first fantasy book I see. I need to have something that sells it to me, and The Dark Tower has those things. So once again, Stephen King, I thank you for, opening the eyes of a blind woman and showing me just how wonderful fantasy in all of its forms can be, and how you've just cross-pollinated all these other genres. For God's sake, what drew me to these books and what drew me to Roland is the fact that he's like Clint Eastwood out of a Sergio Leone western. That's so cool. And of course, The Dark Tower spans all sorts of genres and schools of thought, and just it's a masterpiece. It well and truly is, and I'm so glad that I finally experienced it. So yes, that was my thoughts on The Dark Tower the book and The Dark Tower series, and I apologize if I've ranted and raved in circles and circles, but I cannot deny the passion that this book has ignited in me and how wonderful I feel it is. So that's it, everybody. That is The Dark Tower. And in case you haven't read it and you're interested, please don't be like 17-year-old B. Pick it up and read them all and enjoy them. Bye bye everybody, and I shall see you again for another review. What that review will be, I don't know. Okay guys, so yeah, that's it. So take care of yourselves and each other, and I will see you again.